My name is Martha Wilson. I'm 68 years old, and my only daughter, who hadn't spoken to me in 25 years, invited me to Christmas dinner the day after I won a $20 million lottery. Her greedy smile turned to ash when she saw the gift I brought wasn't money, but her reckoning. I'm telling my story from my quiet little home in Portland, Oregon, where it's a little past noon and a soft rain is tapping against the window pane. It's a peaceful sound, one I've come to cherish. It helps me think. I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is there. Let me know in the comments below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little less lonely, knowing we're all connected by stories. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday. I remember the sky was the color of a dull nickel, a heavy, bruised gray that threatened a rain it hadn't yet decided to release. I was settled in my favorite armchair, a faded floral piece that had seen better days, much like myself. A half-finished novel about a female detective in Iceland lay open in my lap, but I wasn't reading. I was just enjoying the profound silence of my small rental apartment, a silence that had been my most constant companion for more than 2 decades. When the phone buzzed on the mahogany side table, the sound was an intrusion, a sharp tear in the fabric of my quiet afternoon. I glanced at the screen, my reading glasses perched on my nose, fully expecting to see the cheerful face of my friend, Eleanor, likely calling to confirm our weekly coffee date. But the name that glowed on the screen wasn't Eleanor. It was a name I hadn't seen flash across a phone in 2.5 decades. A name that was once the first word I wanted to hear in the morning and the last I'd whisper at night before sleep. Rebecca. My breath caught in my throat. For a long, silent moment, I was sure it was a mistake. A ghost in the machine, a cruel prank. My thumb hovered over the green accept icon, paralyzed, while my heart, a tired old muscle I'd babied since the surgery, suddenly began to beat a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. 25 years of silence. 25 years of birthday cards returned unopened, stamped with brutal red ink. 25 years of holiday voicemails that evaporated into an electronic void. Never answered, never acknowledged. And now, this. A call out of the bruised gray sky. I forced myself to take a steadying breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs. I pressed the icon. Hello? My voice was a dry rasp, a sound I barely recognized. Mom? It's me. It's Rebecca. The voice was different, of course. It was deeper, smoother, more polished than the passionate, sometimes petulant 18-year-old's voice I had stored away in the museum of my memory. But the cadence, the underlying music of her speech was the same. There was a practiced brightness to it, an almost theatrical cheerfulness that immediately set my teeth on edge. It was the voice of someone selling something. Rebecca, I said again. My own voice was flat. A carefully constructed wall to hide the churning turmoil of shock, and a flicker of something I dared not name. It's a surprise? I know, and I'm so sorry it's been so long. Life, it just gets so busy. She laughed, a light, airy sound that felt rehearsed, like a line from a script. Anyway, I saw the news. Oh my gosh, Mom, congratulations, $20 million. I couldn't believe it when I saw your picture in the paper. You look great, by the way. Exactly the same. I didn't say anything. I had not looked exactly the same for a long, long time. The woman in the newspaper photo, the one holding up an oversized check with a polite, bewildered smile for the cameras, had lines around her eyes that told of sleepless nights. She had a certain set to her jaw that spoke of quiet survival. She had silver threads in her hair that were testament to years of silent worry. I was a map of the last 25 years, and Rebecca, my own daughter, couldn't read a single road. So, she continued, her voice plowing through the heavy silence, I was thinking it's been way too long, and with Christmas just around the corner, I'd love for you to come for dinner. Meet my husband, Tom. We'd be thrilled to have you. family is everything, you know. Family is everything. The words hung in the air between us, thick and cloying with hypocrisy. Family was everything when I was alone in a sterile hospital bed recovering from heart surgery, staring at a silent phone and praying for a call that never came. Family was everything when I had to sell my own mother's furniture to make the rent after the divorce, the bitter divorce where her father, Robert, had so skillfully and systematically painted me as a failure. Family was everything when I stood graveside at my own mother's funeral, utterly alone because my only daughter wouldn't return my calls. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the initial shock, like a winter wind blasting away fog. This wasn't a reconciliation. This wasn't an olive branch. This was an audition for the role of wealthy mother who can solve all our problems. And she was hoping I was desperate enough to take the part. A part of me, a small, foolish, sentimental part I thought had died on that hospital bed, wanted to cry. It wanted to scream down the phone, "Where have you been?" But it was quickly and ruthlessly overruled by a different feeling, something hard and cool and heavy that settled in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't hope. It was curiosity, a cold, clinical, almost scientific curiosity. I wanted to see the play. I wanted to see just how far she would go, how well she would perform. "Of course, Rebecca," I said, my voice as smooth and cool as glass. "I'd love to. And honey—" "Yes, Mom?" she asked, and I could practically hear the triumphant, greedy smile spreading across her face. "I have a surprise for you, too." I could hear the satisfaction in her voice as she said her goodbyes. After I hung up, I didn't move for a long time. The phone felt heavy and cold in my hand, a malevolent little object. The rain had finally started, a steady drumming against the window that matched the new steady rhythm in my chest. I wasn't thinking about the $20 million. That was just paper. I was thinking about the performance I had just been invited to. And I decided right then and there that I would not be a mere spectator in the audience. I would be the director. Before you can understand the woman who made that cold decision, you need to understand the room I walked into after that phone call. It wasn't a guest room or a study. My friend Eleanor called it my room of dead mementos. She was more accurate than she knew. I simply called it my archive. It was a small, spare room at the back of my apartment, holding nothing but a single wooden chair and a large, sturdy cardboard box in the corner. The air inside was still and cool, smelling faintly of dust and old paper, the scent of things left behind. I didn't go in there often. Years could pass between visits. It wasn't a place for active mourning anymore. That season had passed. It was a place for remembering a fact, cold and hard as granite. The fact that the daughter I had raised, the girl whose scraped knees I had kissed and whose nightmares I had chased away with soft lullabies, was gone. She had been replaced by a stranger who wore her face and used her name. I switched on the single, bare overhead light. It cast a pale, unforgiving glow on the room. I knelt on the floor, my knees creaking in protest, and pulled the heavy box toward me. The flaps weren't taped shut. They never were. It was a tomb, but not a sealed one. The first thing I saw on top was a thick stack of envelopes, bound with a faded red ribbon that had long lost its festive cheer. Each one was addressed in my own careful cursive to Mrs. Rebecca Wilson at various addresses I'd had to track down over the years, through old friends or public records. And on every single one, in stark, unforgiving black or red ink, was the stamp, "Return to sender, address unknown." Sometimes, more cruelly, refused. There were 25 birthday cards in that stack, 25 Christmas cards. There were cards for her college graduation, which I only knew about because I saw her name in a list in the local paper. There were cards for promotions I only heard about through the grapevine. I ran my thumb over the sharp edge of one envelope. I remembered buying that card. It had a watercolor painting of a peaceful garden on the front. Inside, I had written a simple, hopeful message. "My dearest Rebecca,
No matter where you are or what you're doing, you are always in my heart. I am so proud of the woman you are becoming. Love, Mom." It had come back to me 2 weeks later, the blunt red stamp feeling like a physical slap in the face. Beneath the letters was a small, worn teddy bear with one black button eye. His name was Barnaby. I'd given him to Rebecca when she was 3, a steadfast guardian against the monsters she imagined lived under her bed. The day she'd packed her things to move in with her father after the divorce, I found Barnaby tossed in the trash can in her empty room, half buried under discarded magazines and empty makeup containers. I fished him out, wiped the coffee grounds from his matted fur, and put him in the box. He had been discarded, just like me. The divorce. That was the earthquake that had split our lives apart, leaving a chasm between us that proved impossible to cross. Robert, my ex-husband, was a charismatic man, a natural salesman who could sell ice to an Eskimo. And his greatest sale, his masterpiece of manipulation, was selling our 18-year-old daughter a new version of her mother. He'd had an affair with a younger colleague, Diane. When I discovered it and confronted him, he didn't apologize, he attacked. He sat Rebecca down and told her, with a voice full of feigned sorrow and regret, that I was a bitter, unambitious woman who would hold her back from her dreams. He told her I was the reason he was unhappy, the reason our lives weren't as grand as they should have been. He painted a picture of a glorious future with him and Diane, a future of success and excitement, and contrasted it with a bleak, boring life with a mother who was, in his words, a failure. And Rebecca, young and impressionable, and wanting so badly to believe in a brighter world, bought it completely. The custody battle wasn't for her body, she was already 18, it was for her heart, and I lost spectacularly. He got the beautiful family home, the circle of affluent friends, and the daughter. I got a small settlement that was gone in a year, eaten up by legal fees and the cost of starting over from scratch. My salary as an accountant was steady, but it wasn't enough to maintain the life she was used to. In her eyes, her father's words had come true. I had failed. I dug deeper in the box. A photograph of a smiling, gap-toothed 6-year-old Rebecca at the beach, her face alight with pure joy. A clay handprint, her tiny fingers forever pressed into the now-cracked ceramic, a Mother's Day gift from kindergarten. Each item was a shard of a shattered life, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The sharpest memory, though, wasn't in the box. It was seared into my mind. 4 years ago, I had woken up in the cardiac unit of St. Mary's Hospital after a triple bypass. The first hours were a blur of pain and disorientation, the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the only constant in a world that had tilted on its axis. My dear friend Eleanor was there, holding my hand, her face etched with worry, but as the anesthetic fog cleared, my eyes kept darting to my phone on the bedside table. I had asked Eleanor to call Rebecca's number, the one that I still knew by heart, to leave a message. "Just let her know," I whispered, my throat raw and scraped from the breathing tube. Just in case. For 3 days I lay in that bed, watching the silent black screen of that phone. Every time a nurse came in, every time the phone at the nurse's station rang down the hall, my heart would leap with a painful, stupid, stubborn hope. She'll call! She has to call! Her mother had major heart surgery! She'll call! She never did. It was during that long, sterile, echoing silence that the final, brittle thread of hope inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break. It was a quiet, internal crumbling into dust. I finally understood. The rejection wasn't a phase. It wasn't youthful rebellion. It was a permanent state of being. My daughter, the person she was now, had erased me from her life as completely as one wipes a name off a chalkboard. The woman who called me today wasn't calling her mother. She was calling a lottery number. I gently placed the lid back on the box and pushed it back into the corner. I stood up, my knees protesting again, and walked out of the room, switching off the light. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes after the storm has passed and you're left standing in the wreckage, finally able to see everything for what it truly is. The grief was over. The tangled mess of love and pain and hope had been resolved into a single, hard, clear purpose. I closed the door to the room and to that chapter of my life. It was time to write a new one. The next evening, I met Eleanor at the Daily Grind, our usual coffee spot. It was a cozy place that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, a small island of warmth and normalcy against the damp Portland chill. Eleanor, with her shock of silver hair cut in a stylish bob and her sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, had been my rock for over 30 years. She'd seen me through the ugliest days of the divorce, held my hand through the heart surgery, and had been my biggest cheerleader when I used my meager savings to buy my first investment property. She was more than a sister than a friend. I waited until our lattes were on the table, a small ritual of comfort, before I told her. I stirred the foam, watching it swirl, creating a temporary pattern that would soon disappear. I said, "Rebecca called." My voice was quiet. Eleanor froze, her cup halfway to her lips. She set it down carefully on the saucer, the small clink of porcelain, loud in the momentary silence between us. "She what?" she said. "She saw the news about the lottery, invited me for Christmas dinner." Eleanor stared at me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and profound skepticism. "Martha, let me get this straight. After 25 years of complete and utter silence, of treating you like you don't exist, she calls you the day after you become a multimillionaire and invites you to Christmas dinner?" She shook her head slowly. The nerve, the absolute shameless nerve. She said, "Family is everything," I said, my voice flat, reporting a fact.
Eleanor let out a short, sharp laugh that was devoid of any humor. "Oh, I'll bet she did. Family is everything when the family suddenly has a bank account with 8 figures. What did you say? Please tell me you told her where she could shove her Christmas turkey." I said yes. She groaned, a deep, frustrated sound, and slumped back in the worn cushions of the booth. "Oh, Martha, why? Why would you put yourself through that? You know what this is? It's a shakedown with a side of cranberry sauce. You're walking straight into an ambush." I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and bitter, and it suited my mood perfectly. "I know what it is, Eleanor. I'm not the same fool I was 5 years ago." "Then why go?" she pressed, leaning forward, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective concern that warmed me more than the coffee. "I'm scared for you. I'm scared it's going to hurt you all over again. I saw what you went through. I remember you sitting by that phone in the hospital, your face getting a little paler every time it didn't ring. I never want to see you look that broken again." "That woman isn't here anymore," I said quietly, meeting her intense gaze. "The woman who waited by the phone died in that hospital. She died of neglect. The person who is going to Christmas dinner is someone else entirely." Eleanor studied my face, her brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to read the fine print of my soul. "What's different? What are you planning, Martha? You have that look in your eye, the one you get when you're about to close a difficult real estate deal." I didn't answer directly. Instead, I told her about the archived room, the box of returned cards, the teddy bear in the trash, the feeling of finality I'd had when I closed the door. She listened patiently, her expression softening into a deep, shared sorrow. "You know," she said, after a long silence, "it reminds me of my nephew, Gary." "You remember Gary? Lovely boy when he was a kid, always bringing me dandelions. Now? He has my number on speed dial whenever his car breaks down or he's short on rent. Never calls just to say hello. Last year, he called full of excitement, asking for $2,000 for a specialized training course that he swore would get him a big promotion at work. I was so proud, I gave it to him without a second thought." She sighed, a weary, familiar sound to anyone who has loved someone who only takes. I found out a month later from his sister that he'd used it to go to Las Vegas with his girlfriend. There was no course, no promotion, just another lie. She shook her head. "I had to change my number. It hurt like hell. It felt like I was cutting off a part of myself. But some people, they only see you as a resource, an ATM. And when you let them, they'll just keep making withdrawals until your account is overdrawn and your heart is bankrupt. Her story, so painfully similar to my own, was another small click of confirmation in my mind. This was a pattern, a universal story of love being twisted into leverage. "I'm not going to let her hurt me," I said, my voice firmer now, infused with a new resolve. "And I'm not going to give her a dime. But I'm not going to just ignore it either. For 25 years, she and her father have told a story about me, that I was weak, a failure, that I couldn't provide a good life, that I wasn't good enough." I looked down at my hands, resting on the table. They were hands that had worked, that had saved, that had signed contracts and built a small, secret empire of 25 properties while I lived on a modest accountant's salary. They were not weak hands. "They wrote the first 25 years of this story, Eleanor." I looked up at her again, my eyes holding hers. "I'm going to write the ending." Eleanor watched me, her sharp eyes searching my face. Then she slowly nodded. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "All right then, I see that look. Just be careful. Snakes are still snakes even when they're wearing Christmas sweaters." "I will be," I promised. "And you call me," she insisted, "every step of the way. And if you need anything, a ride, an alibi, someone to hold the shovel, you call me." I laughed, a real laugh this time. It felt good, like stretching a muscle that had been cramped for a long time. "Well," she said, picking up her cup again, a dangerous glint in her eye, "just make sure you write them a real killer ending." I assured her I would. As we left the coffee shop and stepped out into the misty evening, I felt a sense of purpose solidify within me. Eleanor's warning hadn't deterred me. It had focused me. She was right to be scared for the old Martha, but the old Martha was gone. The new Martha had a story to finish, and she would not let the villains win. The next move in their little play came 3 days later. If Rebecca's call was the reconnaissance mission, this was the first wave of the assault. It was even less subtle. The caller ID showed a name I recognized with a jolt of pure distaste. Diane Wilson, my ex-husband's wife, the woman he'd left me for. In all the years since the bitter divorce, we had never spoken, not one single word. Her calling me now was a profound violation of an unspoken truce. I let it ring 3 times, composed myself, and answered with a neutral, "Hello?" Her voice was like honey laced with saccharin, sickeningly sweet and utterly fake. "Martha, it's Diane. I know this is completely out of the blue, and I do hope I'm not disturbing you, but I just had to call after Rebecca told me the wonderful news. We are all so incredibly thrilled for you. It couldn't have happened to a more deserving person." "Diane," I said, my voice a cool, flat stone. I refused to give her any emotional purchase. "Listen, I hope I'm not calling directly," she cooed, her voice dropping into a confidential, conspiratorial whisper, as if we were old friends sharing a secret. "But Rebecca is just so delicate about these things. She would never want to seem like she was asking for anything. You know how she is. So proud, so independent." I almost laughed out loud. Rebecca's pride was a flag of convenience, waved only when it suited her. "The thing is," she continued, laying the groundwork with practiced ease, "as her mother, well, stepmother, but I love her like my own, I'm worried about her. Her business, she's poured her heart and soul into, a little online boutique selling artisanal crafts, but it's struggling. The economy, you know. It's just so difficult for small business owners right now. She's facing some terrible cash flow problems." I waited, my silence a deliberate void. I knew the punchline was coming, The price tag. She needs an infusion of capital, she said, finally getting to it. Just to tide her over, to get her over this hump. We were thinking, and please, this is just between us girls, that maybe you could help her out. Just a small loan to protect her investment and her dream. I think $400,000 should do it.
$400,000. She said the number as casually as if she were asking for a cup of sugar. A small loan. It was more than my total salary for the last decade of my working life before retirement. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. They hadn't even waited until the Christmas dinner to start carving me up. They were already sending in the troops with their hands out. Here it was, the raw, naked greed, stripped of the flimsy family is everything pretext. Diane wasn't even pretending this was about love or reconciliation. This was a business transaction, plain and simple. I see, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It would just mean the world to her, Diane pressed on, clearly misinterpreting my silence as hesitation or consideration. It would prove to her that you're really there for her, that you support her dreams. It would be such a powerful gesture of family love, a way to heal the past, don't you think? The word love coming from her mouth was an obscenity. This woman had been a key architect of my family's destruction. She had stood by my ex-husband, Robert, while he dismantled my life and systematically poisoned my daughter against me. I had a sudden, vivid memory of seeing them together, shortly after the divorce, laughing over lunch at a fancy downtown restaurant I could no longer afford. Diane was wearing a beautiful silk scarf, a vibrant splash of color. I remember thinking with a bitterness that tasted like bile that the scarf was probably bought with the money that should have gone toward the college fund I had so carefully built for Rebecca, a fund that had vanished along with everything else in the divorce settlement. A lawyer had told me it was gone, legally. I had to hand it to them. It was a classic two-pronged attack. Rebecca plays the part of the long-lost, loving daughter to get me in the door, and Diane plays the role of the concerned other mother to make the direct financial demand. They probably sat in their expensive living room and scripted this whole thing, convinced I was a lonely old woman so desperate for a crumb of affection from my daughter that I'd leap at the chance to buy my way back into her life. It was time to tear up their script. Diane, I began, my voice calm, but with an unmistakable edge of ice. I appreciate you sharing your concerns. However, my finances are my own affair. I don't discuss them with anyone except my financial advisor, and I certainly don't hand out $400,000 loans based on a phone call. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and profound. The honeyed sweetness vanished, instantly replaced by a sharp, cold shock. It was as if a mask had been ripped away. "What?" she finally stammered, her voice losing all its polish. I don't understand. This is for Rebecca. This is for your daughter." I am aware of who it's for. My answer is no. "But you have $20 million. The words burst out of her, a raw squeak of disbelief and outrage. "It's barely a fraction of what you have. I can't believe you'd be so selfish. After all these years, this is how you show your love? No wonder Rebecca felt she had to keep her distance. It was always about you, wasn't it, Martha?" And there it was. The pivot, the blame shift, the immediate practiced move to paint me as the villain once again. It was the same tactic Robert had used for years. It was their family playbook, and they were running it on me again. "Thank you for your perspective, Diane," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a granite countertop. "I have to go now." I hung up the phone before she could sputter another word. I stood in my kitchen, my hand resting on the cool surface of my own modest laminate countertop. The conversation hadn't upset me. It had clarified everything. It confirmed the stakes, it confirmed the enemy, and it confirmed, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that I was doing the right thing.
This wasn't just about a greedy phone call. This was about a lifetime of manipulation and emotional extortion. And the bill was about to come due. Diane's clumsy, aggressive demand had been revealing, but it was just the opening act. It was raw greed. I needed something more definitive from Rebecca herself. I needed to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that her newfound affection was a performance tied directly to my perceived net worth. I needed a test, a simple experiment to measure the monetary value of her love. So I devised one. It was a lie, of course, a calculated piece of fiction, but in a war of deceit, sometimes you have to use the enemy's weapons against them. 2 days after my call with Diane, after giving them enough time to stew and strategize, I picked up the phone and dialed Rebecca's number. I took a few deep, shaky breaths before I hit the call button, channeling the terrified, heartbroken woman I used to be. I had to make this performance utterly believable. I even splashed a little water on my cheeks for effect, a trick I'd seen in an old movie. She answered on the second ring, her voice clipped and wary. "Mom?" "Rebecca," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I let in a sob, a dry, rasping sound catch in my throat. "Oh, Rebecca, something terrible has happened." "Mom, what is it? What's wrong?" There was a note of genuine alarm in her voice, but underneath it, I could already hear the unspoken question, the real source of the alarm. "Is it the money?" "The money," I choked out, as if I could barely speak the words. It's it's gone. Most of it." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" The alarm was sharper now, laced with an unmistakable thread of impatience. "I did something so stupid," I whispered, letting my voice tremble with manufactured shame. "A man called, a financial advisor. He seemed so professional, so kind. He talked about cryptocurrency, about doubling my winnings overnight. He said it was a sure thing. I was foolish, I know, but it sounded so convincing. I transferred the money, and now he's gone. The website is gone. The phone number is disconnected. The police say it's a sophisticated scam. They said the money is likely untraceable, wired through a dozen different countries by now. It's all gone, Rebecca. All I have left is my pension and this little apartment." I let the silence hang, a carefully constructed web of feigned devastation. I could almost feel her on the other end of the line, processing the information, her mind racing, the gears of her greed grinding to a screeching halt. I pictured her face, the mask of concern falling away to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "Oh, Mom," she finally said. Her voice was flat, hollow, devoid of any real emotion. The warmth from our first call was completely gone. The performance was over. That's just terrible." "I know," I sniffled, dabbing at my wet cheeks. "I feel like such a fool, but I'm so glad I have you. You said family is everything, and I really need my family right now. I'm still so looking forward to Christmas. Just being with you and your husband will make everything better." This was the critical moment, the final turn of the screw. Would she offer comfort, or would she cut the cord? There was another long, heavy pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted dramatically. It was cool, distant, and patronizing, the voice of a doctor delivering bad news to a stranger without any emotional investment. "Mom, listen," she said slowly, choosing her words with a chilling precision. "I think you need to focus on yourself right now, on getting your finances sorted out. A trip down here for Christmas, it's probably not the best idea. It's an expense you likely can't afford now, and honestly, it would just be a distraction. You need to be practical."
"But you invited me," I said, my voice a small, wounded whisper. "You said you wanted to see me." "And I do," she lied smoothly, the falsehood slipping easily from her tongue. "But this changes things. You're clearly not in a good state of mind. You've been taken advantage of. You need to take care of yourself. We can reschedule sometime when you're more stable." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a dismissal. The invitation, which had been extended with such fanfare just a week ago, was now rescinded with cold, clinical efficiency. The door that had been thrown open was now slammed shut, locked, and bolted in my face. But then came the final, telling detail, a small slip that revealed the cunning, calculating mind behind the callous words. "Look, Mom," she said, her voice softening into a grotesque parody of sympathy that made my skin crawl. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, but that lottery money, that was just a fluke, right? A bit of luck. It wasn't like your other assets, was it? Your real estate investments and things. Those are all safe, I assume." My blood ran cold. She knew. Somehow, she knew about my real estate portfolio, the properties I had kept secret for years, my quiet triumph, built on discipline and shrewd decisions while living on a modest salary. The lottery win was just the flashy headline. She was probing for the real story, the real wealth. She was assessing what was left to plunder. I have to go," I said, pretending to be too distraught to continue. "Of course, Mom, take care of yourself," she said, the fake sympathy dripping from every word. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my hand perfectly steady. There was no pain, there was no heartbreak, there was only the icy certainty of a scientist whose hypothesis has just been proven correct beyond all doubt. The test was a complete success. Her love was conditional, her concern was a lie, and her greed was far more informed and dangerous than I had realized. She hadn't just been after the lottery winnings, she was after everything. My life's work, my security, my dignity, and she had just confirmed that she would stop at nothing to get it. The game was far more serious than I had thought. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to assemble my own team. The revelation that Rebecca knew about my real estate portfolio changed the entire equation. This wasn't just an opportunistic grab for lottery cash. This was a calculated long-term campaign. The coldness of her questions told me she had been doing her homework, probably for a long time. I could no longer treat this as a simple, albeit painful, family drama I could handle on my own. It was time to bring in a professional. It was time to hire a lawyer, or, in my case, something better. My first and only call was to David Chen. David had been my financial advisor for 15 years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 40s, the son of immigrants who had built his own successful firm from the ground up on a foundation of integrity and hard work. He was meticulous, pragmatic, and the only person in the world who knew the true extent of my wealth. He had helped me structure the deals for every one of my 25 properties, all held under a series of anonymous LLCs to protect my privacy. He was more than an advisor. He was the guardian of my financial fortress. I scheduled a meeting at his downtown office, a sleek, modern space with glass walls and a panoramic view of the city and the river below. It was a world of cool confidence and quiet power, a world away from my cozy, cluttered apartment. David greeted me with his usual warm but professional smile. "Martha, it's good to see you. I trust you're managing the sudden publicity?" "The publicity is the least of my problems, David," I said, getting straight to the point as I sat down in the plush leather chair opposite his large, uncluttered mahogany desk. I laid it all out for him, methodically, like I was presenting a case file. The 25 years of silence, the sudden phone call from Rebecca, the invitation, the demand for $400,000 from her stepmother, Diane, and finally, the crypto lie and Rebecca's chillingly specific question about my other assets. As I spoke, I saw David's expression shift from polite interest to sharp-eyed concern. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his gaze fixed on me. He was a numbers guy, a man trained to see patterns and assess risk. He was seeing a very dangerous pattern now. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, just looking at me, processing the ugly tapestry I had laid out before him. "Martha," he said, finally, his voice measured and serious. "This is, deeply troubling. On the surface, it's a classic pattern of attempted financial elder abuse. But because it's your daughter, it's also a deeply personal family matter. As your financial advisor, my primary duty is to protect your assets. Getting involved in a personal dispute is a messy business. It's a legal and ethical minefield.
Are you sure you want to go down this road? He was being cautious. He was drawing a professional boundary, and I respected that, but I needed him to cross it. David, I said, my voice firm and clear, leaving no room for doubt. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. For 15 years, I have been your client. I have followed your advice, and together, we have built a significant portfolio from almost nothing. I've always seen you not just as an advisor, but as a strategist. And that's what I need now. A strategist. I could see I had his full attention. The professional veil had lifted slightly. This is no longer a personal dispute, I continued, my voice low and intense. This has escalated. This is a hostile takeover attempt on my life's work. My daughter and her stepmother are not just being greedy, they're being predatory. Rebecca knows about the real estate. That tells me she's been digging. Who knows what else she's planning? Is she going to try to forge documents? Is she going to try to have a lawyer declare me incompetent? I can't risk it. I will not let my life's work, the only inheritance I truly care about, be stolen by them. I need to know exactly what I'm up against. I paused, letting the words sink in. I am not asking you to do this as a favor. I want to hire you and your firm. I want to open a new account, a new project. Let's call it Project Reckoning. I want you to use your resources to conduct a full, deep-dive financial and background investigation on two people, Rebecca Wilson and Diane Wilson. I want to know everything, their debts, their assets, their business dealings, their associates. I want to know where every penny comes from and where it goes. I will fund it completely. This isn't about emotion, David. This is about risk management. It's about protecting my inheritance, the one I built for myself. David stared at me with a new look of profound respect and perhaps a little astonishment in his eyes. I wasn't the quiet, frugal old woman who came in once a quarter to review her portfolio. I was a CEO presenting a business plan. I was the commander of my own small army, and I was recruiting my top general. A slow smile spread across his face. It was a predator's smile, the smile of a man who enjoys a complex problem. Project Reckoning, he repeated softly. I like the name. All right, David. You've got my attention. You've got my firm. When do we start? Immediately. The shift in the room was palpable. We were no longer just a client and her advisor. We were a team, a war council of two. David spun his chair around to his computer, all business now.
I have a man I use for sensitive due diligence, he said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A private investigator named Miller, ex-cop, very discreet, very thorough. He can find a needle in a haystack. I also have a forensic accountant on retainer, Sarah Jenkins. She can smell a phony balance sheet from a mile away. Let's start with Rebecca's online boutique. We'll pull the public records, incorporation documents, and see what the financial statements have to say. As I left his office and stepped into the cool afternoon air, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the fleeting, chaotic power of the lottery money. That was just dumb luck. This was the power of competence, of strategy, of taking control of a narrative that had been used against me for far too long. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to Rebecca's moves, I was making my own. And I had a feeling that the things we were about to uncover would make a demand for $400,000 look like child's play. The information from David's team started to trickle in within days, and with each new report, the picture grew darker and more disturbing. It was like peeling a rotten onion, with each layer revealing a more pungent level of decay and deceit. What I had suspected was simple greed turned out to be a sprawling, desperate enterprise of fraud. The first report from the investigator Miller was on Rebecca's business ventures. She didn't have one online boutique. She'd had 3 over the past 5 years, each with a different trendy name and a different, inspiring mission statement. All of them had followed the exact same pattern: a splashy launch on social media, a lot of hype about empowering women or saving the planet, a period of taking investments from small-time backers, friends, local business people, people who believed her story, followed by a quiet, unceremonious collapse into bankruptcy. the money from the investors seemed to vanish into a black hole of operating expenses and marketing costs. Miller, with his old-school cop persistence, managed to track down several of these angry investors. I insisted on meeting with one of them myself, a woman named Maria, at a small, anonymous cafe downtown. She was a single mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, and she had invested her entire savings, $20,000, into Rebecca's latest venture, a line of supposedly eco-friendly baby clothes. She was so convincing, she told me, her voice tight with a mixture of bitterness and shame. She came to a local women's business group. She talked about empowering mothers, about creating sustainable futures for our children. She showed us these beautiful samples, these soft, organic cotton onesies. Maria's hands trembled as she clutched her coffee cup. Then, 6 months in, the excuses started. Supply chain issues from our overseas supplier. Production delays, all while I was seeing her on Instagram posting pictures from a vacation in Hawaii showing off a new designer handbag. When I started asking for my money back for any kind of financial statement, she blocked me. The business folded a month later. The lawyer I couldn't really afford said the money was all gone legally. My son's college fund, just gone. My heart ached for this woman. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was a predator. She was a smiling, well-dressed wolf who preyed on the hopes and dreams of good people like Maria. It was sickening. But it got worse. The forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, dug into Rebecca's personal finances, and the picture she painted was one of spectacular desperation. Rebecca wasn't just living beyond her means, she was living in a completely different financial galaxy. She was drowning in debt. 2 maxed-out mortgages on her lavish home, enormous credit card bills from high-end department stores, a lease on a luxury SUV she couldn't possibly afford. She wasn't just greedy, she was terrified. She was living a life built on a foundation of lies and other people's money, and the whole structure was about to collapse on her head. My lottery winnings weren't just a windfall to her, she saw them as a bailout, a way to keep the fraudulent carousel spinning just a little longer. Just as I was processing the depth of my daughter's deceit, David called me with an update on Diane. And this was the discovery that made my blood run truly cold, that showed me the true nature of the evil I was dealing with. "And Martha, are you sitting down?" he asked, his voice grim and devoid of its usual professional calm. "What is it, David?" He explained, Sarah was tracing some Rebecca's cash withdrawals. She found a series of regular, untraceable payments to Diane. Not huge amounts, but consistent, a few thousand every month. It made her curious, so she did a deep dive search on Diane Wilson herself, and she found it. A GoFundMe page. He sent me the link. I clicked on it, my hand unsteady, and there she was. The webpage was a masterpiece of manipulation. It featured a professionally taken photo of Diane, her head shaved, a brave, wan smile on her face as she looked wistfully out a window. The headline was stark and dramatic. "Help Diane beat stage 4 ovarian cancer." The page was filled with heartfelt, beautifully written pleas, talking about her brave fight, her mounting medical bills for experimental treatments in Mexico, her profound desire to see her grandchildren grow up. There were dozens of updates detailing her chemo sessions and her bad days, complete with photos of her looking pale and frail. And there were hundreds of comments from donors. "Praying for you, Diane. You're a true fighter. My own mother passed from this terrible disease, so happy to contribute to your brave battle." The fund had raised over $80,000. I had Miller check with the state oncology board and every major hospital in a 3-state radius, David said, his voice hard as steel. There is no record of Diane Wilson ever being diagnosed with or treated for any form of cancer, ever. The photos of her with a shaved head? We found the original post on her hairdresser's Instagram page from last spring. The caption read, "New look for a new season. Shaved and loving it." I stared at the screen, a wave of pure physical nausea washing over me. This was a level of evil I couldn't have imagined in my darkest nightmares. It wasn't just greed, it was a ghoulish, parasitic evil. She was feasting on the compassion of strangers, turning their kindness and sympathy into cash for vacations and designer clothes. She was stealing from people who genuinely wanted to help someone in the fight of their life. And Rebecca knew. The regular payments from Rebecca to Diane was hush money, or perhaps her cut of the profits. They were in it together, a mother-daughter team of emotional vampires. I thought of my own battle with my heart, the real pain, the real fear, the real sterile hospital rooms. And I looked at this webpage, this theater of fake suffering, and something inside me snapped shut, cold and hard and final. "David," I said, my voice shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from pure, unadulterated rage. "I want to burn it all to the ground." He said, his voice grimly satisfied. "I thought you might. Miller has already compiled a complete file. Names and contact information for every major donor to that GoFundMe page. We also have a list of Rebecca's investors who are more than eager to join a class action lawsuit. The pieces are all in place." "Good," I said, my voice now steady, the rage solidifying into purpose. "Send the file on Diane to the State Attorney General's office, anonymously. And send the information about the GoFundMe to a reporter you trust, someone who handles investigative journalism and won't be bought off. As for Rebecca's investors, tell them to have their lawyer get the lawsuit ready, but tell them to wait for my signal to file it."
"What's the signal?" David asked. I looked at the calendar on my wall. December 25th was circled in red. "Christmas morning," I said. "They can file it first thing on Christmas morning." The days leading up to Christmas were the calm before the storm, but it was a tense, electric calm, the kind of heavy, charged air you feel just before a thunderstorm breaks. David's team worked with quiet, deadly efficiency in the background, assembling the legal and journalistic ammunition. Meanwhile, I went about my days with a strange sense of detached purpose. I baked gingerbread cookies with Eleanor, the spicy scent filling my small kitchen with a warmth that felt like a lie. I wrapped small, thoughtful gifts for the children at the local community center where I volunteered, my hands moving with practiced ease. On the surface, everything was normal, festive, and peaceful. But underneath, a tidal wave was building, poised to crash down and wash away a lifetime of deceit. The plan was set to detonate on the morning of Christmas Eve. I didn't want the blow to land on Christmas Day itself. That felt too theatrical, too much like their style. I wanted them to have the entire day to sit in the rubble of their lives, to feel the walls closing in before I arrived for the final act. On the morning of the 24th, I was in my kitchen, sipping a cup of strong black tea, watching the pale winter sun struggle to break through the Oregon clouds. My phone buzzed with a text from David. It was 9 a.m. It contained a single link to the website of a major Portland news outlet. The headline was stark and brutal, designed for maximum impact. "Local socialite's cancer fundraiser exposed as cruel hoax." The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, devastatingly thorough. It detailed Diane's fictitious battle with cancer, quoted hospital spokespersons denying she was ever a patient, and included heartbroken, angry statements from donors who had been duped. They didn't name their source, of course, but they didn't have to. The evidence, the lack of medical records, the hairdresser's Instagram post, was overwhelming. Diane's carefully constructed world of sympathy and victimhood had been obliterated in an instant. An hour later, at 10 a.m., David texted again.
The class action lawsuit against Rebecca Wilson and her company was officially filed with the county court an hour ago. A process server is en route to her residence. ETA, 30 minutes. I imagined the scene with crystalline clarity. The doorbell ringing at their pristine, oversized house, Rebecca, perhaps annoyed at the interruption to her holiday preparations, opening the door to a grim-faced man who would hand her a thick manila envelope. The confusion turning to dawning horror as she read the words on the first page. "You have been served." The lawsuit would detail the fraud, the misappropriation of funds, the broken promises. It was a legal document, but it was also a public declaration of her failure and her corruption. It was around noon when my phone finally rang. It was Rebecca. I let it ring 4 times, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my tea before I picked up. "Mom!" she shrieked, her voice a ragged, hysterical mess. There was no pretense of warmth now, no practiced cheerfulness, only raw, undiluted panic. "Mom! Oh my God, Mom, you won't believe what's happening. Someone filed a lawsuit against me. A bunch of old investors, they're lying. They're trying to ruin me. It's a nightmare." "A lawsuit?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of gentle, grandmotherly concern. "Oh, Rebecca, that's terrible. What's it about?" "They're all lies. And Diane. Oh God, Mom, Diane." She wailed, her voice climbing higher with each word. "Someone wrote an article about her, a horrible, vicious article saying her cancer was fake. Her picture is everywhere. She's a mess. She won't stop crying. Her life is over. Our friends are calling. The media is calling. It's a disaster." I could hear Diane wailing in the background, a theatrical, keening sound that was clearly meant to be overheard. Even in her desperation, she was performing. "This is a nightmare," Rebecca sobbed into the phone. "A complete and utter nightmare. Someone is trying to destroy us." "That sounds dreadful, dear," I said soothingly, my voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry you're going through this on Christmas Eve of all days." "You have to help us," she cried, her voice shifting from panic to a desperate, commanding tone. The victim was gone, replaced by the drill sergeant. "You have to. You have the money, Mom. You can hire the best lawyers. You can make this go away. You can pay them off. You have to fix this." There it was again. The absolute, unshakable belief that my money was her solution, that I was not a person, but a resource to be deployed, a walking, talking bank vault to be cracked open in case of emergency. She wasn't asking for my help. She was demanding I deploy my assets. "I'm on my way," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm leaving now. We'll talk when I get there." "Oh, thank God," she breathed, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief washing through her voice. "Thank you, Mom. I knew we could count on you. Please hurry." I hung up the phone. I didn't hurry. I finished my tea. I went into my bedroom and calmly got dressed. I chose a simple, elegant, dark green dress, the color of pine needles. I put on a string of pearls my own mother had left me, a real inheritance, one of love and integrity. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were clear and steady. The storm had broken, just as I had planned. Now it was time to walk through the wreckage and deliver my Christmas gift. I picked up my purse. Inside was my wallet, my keys, and a single, small, rectangular object wrapped in plain brown paper. It was the only gift I was bringing. As I walked out of my apartment and locked the door behind me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The war was already over. This was just the surrender ceremony. The drive to Rebecca's house was surreal. Christmas carols played softly on the radio, familiar melodies singing of peace on earth and goodwill to men, while I drove toward a house that I knew had become a war zone. Her neighborhood was one of those new, immaculate developments with sprawling, custom-built houses that all looked vaguely the same, each one broadcasting a quiet, desperate statement of wealth and success. Lawns were perfectly manicured even in winter, and oversized inflatable snowmen dotted the landscape. When I pulled my modest sedan into the curved driveway, I could see the chaos even from the car. The front door was slightly ajar, as if someone had fled in or out in a hurry. Inside, the lights were too bright, blazing with a harsh, interrogative glare. I walked up the stone path, my sensible heels clicking with a steady, unhurried rhythm, and stepped inside without knocking. The scene was of utter devastation. Rebecca was pacing the cavernous, two-story living room like a caged animal, her phone clutched in her hand, her expensive silk blouse wrinkled, her face pale and streaked with mascara-laced tears. Her husband, Tom, a man I'd never met but recognized from photos, sat helplessly on a pristine white sofa, looking completely overwhelmed and out of his depth. And on another chair, a chaise lounge of crushed velvet, Diane was curled into a ball, wrapped in a cashmere throw, letting out shuddering theatrical sobs that seemed to rise and fall on cue. The beautifully decorated 12-foot Christmas tree in the corner, with its mountain of perfectly wrapped, glittering presents underneath, seemed like a cruel, mocking joke.
They all looked up as I entered, my calm presence a stark contrast to their frantic energy. A wave of desperate, frantic hope washed over Rebecca's face. "Mom!" she cried, rushing toward me, her hands outstretched as if to a savior. "Thank God you're here! Did you bring your checkbook? We need to call a lawyer, a crisis PR firm, something. David Chen, your guy, he's supposed to be the best, right? You have to get him on the phone." She tried to take my arm, to lead me further into the room, but I stood my ground, my feet planted, and she stopped, her hands fluttering uselessly. I looked from her frantic face to Diane's trembling form. "We need to issue a statement," Diane wailed from the chair, her voice muffled by the expensive blanket. "Say it was a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake, an administrative error. Martha, you have to tell them it's not true. You have to support us." They were so consumed by their own panic that they didn't see the look on my face. They didn't register my stillness, my silence. They only saw a solution, a bank, a tool to be used. "Mom, please," Rebecca begged, her voice cracking, devolving into a childish whine. "You have to use your money to fix this, all of it. Your real estate money, everything. You owe us that. You were never there for me. You never gave me anything. This is your chance to finally be a mother, to finally do something for me." "You owe us that." The word struck me with the force of a physical blow, the sheer, breathtaking, psychopathic audacity of it. After 25 years of calculated cruelty and neglect, she believed I owed her my ruin to salvage hers. That's when I knew the time for silence was over. "You want to talk about what I owe you, Rebecca?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos like a shard of glass, silencing the room. The sobbing from the chaise lounge stopped abruptly. All three of them stared at me. "Let's talk about it," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "I owed you a safe home, and I gave you one until your father decided he wanted a newer model of wife and blew our family apart. I owed you my love, and I gave it to you every single day. In fact, I'm still paying for it." I looked directly at her, my gaze unwavering. "You want to talk about what you were never given? I gave you birthday cards you sent back, unopened. I gave you phone calls you ignored for 25 years. I gave you my heart, and you left it in a hospital room to get cold while you were, I assume, busy." Rebecca flinched, as if I had struck her. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "And you," I said, turning my gaze to the figure on the chair, who was now sitting up, the blanket clutched to her chest. "You, Diane, you helped him do it. You stood by and watched him turn my daughter against me, and then you had the gall to call me begging for money for a fake illness you invented to cheat good, kind people out of their hard-earned money. You didn't just steal money. You stole their compassion. You poisoned a well of human decency for your own pathetic greed." Diane stopped crying. Her mouth hung open, her eyes wide with the shock of being truly seen for the first time.
This isn't some random tragedy that fell from the sky, I said, my voice rising slightly, filled with the cold fire of a truth held back for too long. This is not something my money can fix. This is a harvest. For years, you both have planted the seeds: deceit, cruelty, manipulation, greed. And now, on this beautiful Christmas Eve, the crop has come in. Rebecca just stared at me, comprehension slowly, horribly dawning in her eyes, replacing the panic with a new, terrifying understanding. You, she whispered, the word barely audible. It was you. You did this to us. I did nothing, I said calmly, my voice returning to a quiet, level tone. I simply held up a mirror. Everything you see around you today, this chaos, this ruin, it is your own reflection. They looked at me, their faces masks of disbelief and horror. The final piece of their world had just crumbled. The bank was not open. The savior was, in fact, the architect of their ruin. You asked me about your inheritance, Rebecca, I said softly. My voice was gentle now, almost sad. I reached into my purse and took out the small, paper-wrapped object. I walked to the polished marble coffee table, a ridiculously expensive piece of furniture, and placed it in the center. You demanded it. With trembling fingers, she reached out and fumbled with the wrapping paper, tearing it away. It was a single, faded greeting card. On the front was a watercolor painting of a garden. It was the first birthday card she had ever sent back to me, the one from all those years ago. This, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that filled the suddenly silent, cavernous room. This is your inheritance. It is all I have left to give you. It is the perfect symbol of every choice you have ever made. I looked at their shattered faces one last time. Tom, the husband, was staring at me with something akin to awe. Diane looked like a ghost, and Rebecca just looked broken. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was like feeling pity for a snake that has finally bitten its own tail. There was nothing left to say. I turned around, my back straight, and walked out of the house. I didn't look back. The sound of their world collapsing was the only Christmas carol I needed to hear. I walked out of that house into the cold, crisp Christmas Eve air. The sky was a deep star-dusted velvet, and the world was quiet and still. A neighbor's Christmas lights blinked red and green, casting cheerful, dancing shadows on the sidewalk. As I got into my car and pulled away from the curb, I saw the house one last time in my rearview mirror, a brightly lit box of misery and chaos. Then I turned the corner, and it was gone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy or a sense of victory. I felt quiet. It was the quiet that comes after a long, painful fever has finally broken, a feeling of lightness, of release. The heavy, suffocating cloak of grief and obligation I had carried for 25 years, the one that had been tailored by my ex-husband and worn by my daughter, had finally been shrugged from my shoulders and left on the floor of that expensive house. In the weeks and months that followed, I heard snippets of the fallout through David, who reported the details with a grim, professional satisfaction. Rebecca's class action lawsuit ended with a massive judgment against her that forced her into personal and professional bankruptcy. The opulent house was sold to pay off a fraction of her debts to the investors she had swindled. Her husband, Tom, the silent partner in her life of deceit, finally found a sliver of a spine and filed for divorce. Diane, facing overwhelming evidence and public scorn, took a plea bargain for wire fraud that involved a hefty fine, a lengthy period of community service, and a permanent public stain on her reputation. Their grand performance was over, the curtains drawn on an empty, ruined stage. I never heard from them directly again. A single desperate voicemail from Rebecca appeared on my phone about 6 months later, her voice thin and whiny, starting another veiled plea for money. I deleted it without listening to the end. The number was now blocked. The door was closed, locked, and the key thrown away.
I didn't let their downfall define my future. My life, which had been lived in shades of gray for so long, began to open up in ways I hadn't allowed it to before. I sold my small rental apartment and, with David's help, bought a beautiful little cottage with a sprawling garden overlooking the Willamette River. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine, bought and paid for with the fruits of my own labor and intelligence. It was a home built on a foundation of strength, not lies. The lottery money, the strange, random catalyst for this whole affair, was put to better use. It was, in the end, a tool for justice, and now it would be a tool for good. I worked with David to establish a charitable trust called the Wilson Fund, not after me, but in honor of my own parents, John and Eleanor Wilson, who had taught me the value of integrity and hard work. The fund provides scholarships and grants to single mothers trying to get an education or start a small business. It helps women build their own lives on their own terms, so they never have to depend on the whims of a man or the conditional love of a child. That felt like a real legacy, a real inheritance to leave the world. I started traveling. I, who had never been farther east than Idaho, saw the autumn leaves burn crimson and gold in New England. I felt the warm Mediterranean sun on my face in a small village in Italy. I walked through the grand halls of the Louvre in Paris and stood before masterpieces I had only ever seen in books. I spent my time with Eleanor, with new friends from my gardening club and my volunteer work, with people who saw me for who I was, not for what I had. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my garden in the early morning, a cup of tea in my hands, watching the river flow by, I think about that Christmas. I don't feel anger anymore. That fire has burned itself out, leaving behind not ashes, but clean, fertile ground. I just feel a quiet sense of sorrow for the daughter I lost so long ago, the little girl with the gap-toothed smile, and a profound sense of gratitude for the woman I was forced to become in her absence. For 25 years, I thought family was an unbreakable bond, something you had to cling to no matter how much it hurt. But I learned that family, true family, is a garden. It needs to be tended by everyone involved. It needs watering with respect and feeding with kindness and weeding with truth. If you only show up at harvest time expecting to claim the fruits without ever having sown a single seed, you'll find nothing but barren, dusty ground. My greatest wealth wasn't that lottery ticket. It was the self-respect I finally refused to sell at any price. Forgiveness is a complex thing. Maybe one day, in the quiet of my own heart, I'll find it for them. But I learned that forgiveness and reconciliation are two very different things. You can forgive from a distance while still honoring the boundaries you built to protect your own peace. My name is Martha Wilson, and I am the architect of my own life. And finally, after all these years, I am at peace. Thank you for listening to my story.